Hi class, this is Professor Harmony Kim. Today you will study Bhikkhuni ordination in the Theravada Buddhism. We know that the Buddha established the Bhikkhuni Sangha. Officially, sanctioned Bhikkhuni ordination disappeared from the Theravada Buddhist tradition centuries ago. The true Dhamma is now established in many Western countries such as Australia. In the West, the absence of Bhikkhuni is seen as a major defect of Buddhism. The lack of a female equivalent to the Theravada Buddhist monk is a big reason why many Westerners do not become Buddhist. Ajahn Brahm stated that if we do not establish a Bhikkhuni Sangha, then Buddhism will not last even another 50 years in the West. The Holiness Dalai Lama called First International Congress on Buddhist Women's Role in the Sangha. The subtitle is Bhikkhuni Vinaya and Ordination Lineage. This conference was held at the University of Hamburg from July 18 through 20, 2007. This forum aimed to discuss the revival of Bhikkhuni. The Dalai Lama insisted that monks and nuns from all traditions contribute to the debate, as well as academic learned in the Vinaya. So many scholars also attend this forum. The Congress consisted of presentation from 65 monks, nuns, academics, and Buddhist lay people. All offers unequivalent support for the prospect of Bhikkhuni ordination. They delve into the origin of Bhikkhuni, dissected the story of the first ordination, analyze the Garudharma I will introduce a little bit later. They told of the early development of Buddhism, described the situation for Bhikkhuni throughout history in Sri Lanka, China, Tibet, Korea, Vietnam, and elsewhere. Also, the participants showed the situation for Buddhist renunciate women in various cultures today and their prospect for the future. Also, they explained how in 443 CE, the Bhikkhuni lineage had been taken from Sri Lanka to China and was returned from China to Sri Lanka. They also evaluated how the existing Vinaya provide models for Bhikkhuni ordination in the Tibetan tradition. Some of these topics are covered in this lecture. The Dalai Lama has consistently supported Bhikkhuni ordination and has given his permission for women to take Bhikkhuni ordination in the East Asian tradition. A significant handful of women have been in robes for over 20 years and are teachers and leaders of their own communities. In Buddhism, we do not have the problem that our founders' closest disciples are all men. We know that the Buddha established the Bhikkhuni Sangha, so Bhikkhuni ordination does not require any rewriting or adaptation of our ancient scriptures. Theravadic cultures have developed various ordination platforms to substitute for the absence of Bhikkhuni, such as the 8 precepts in Pali, Mechi, 10 precepts, Dasasilamata, and so on. Many nuns practicing within these forums in Thailand, Burma, England, and elsewhere are content with their roles, and also they fear that Bhikkhuni ordination will disrupt their limited but familiar lives. For such women, the existing renunciate forms will remain the preferred option. Only Bhikkhuni ordination platform is founded on the pattern of the Buddha's dispensation, which is recognized universally by all Buddhist traditions. Any other ordination platform must be limited and local and will never attain comparable spiritual depth or institutional authority. One of the great needs of Buddhism is that from its outset it was transnational and non-ethnic. Later traditions have developed strongly ethnocentric or nationalistic models for the Dhamma. And while these may have had a certain usefulness, they can never supplant the authentic dispensation. If the Sangha remains ethnocentric, how can they act as leaders for a lay community that is increasingly globalized? This is a cruel dilemma facing traditional sanghas in many Buddhist countries today. The original Buddhist sutra and Vinaya offers us the ideal framework for nurturing the growth of the Sangha. While traditional sanghas retreat from the future into a fantasized past, we greet the future with hope. Officially, sanctioned Bhikkhuni ordination disappeared from the Theravada Buddhist tradition centuries ago. The last evidence for the existence of the original Bhikkhuni Sangha in a country following Theravada Buddhism date from Sri Lanka in the 11th century. Beginning in the late 1990s, the revival of the Bhikkhuni ordination has been underway in the Theravada world, spearheaded by monks and nuns from Sri Lanka. With the support of a number of learned monks, Sri Lankan women have sought to restore the long vanished order of nuns not only to a place in their nation's heritage, but to the religious life of international Theravada Buddhism. While monastic ordination has never been an absolute requirement for spiritual practice and attainment in Buddhist, through the centuries, the lifeblood of the Buddhist tradition has flowed through its monastery and hermitages. Even today, in this age of electronic commerce and higher technology, the call to the simple monastic life still inspires many women as well as men. Yet, in most countries that follow the Theravada tradition, women are allowed to enter only upon subordinate forms of renunciate life. The heritage of formally sanctioned monastic ordination prescribed in the ancient canonical text is denied them. Now let's look into the stage of Bhikkhuni ordination. Monastic ordination as a Bhikkhuni involves 3 stages. The first stage is called Pavaja. This stage is just going first into homelessness or novice ordination. Just person who wanna get ordination leave their house, therefore they become homelessness. and become novice. Second stage is the Sikamana training. This stage prepares the candidate for full ordination. The last stage is called Upasampada or full ordination. Let's look at the Sikamana, the intermediate stage, the second stage, a little bit detail. The Sikamana training. Before female can take Upasampada, a woman candidate must live as a Sikamana or probationer. And this probationer trained in 6 rules for a period of 2 years. She receives a status of Sikamana through a Sanghakamma, a legal act of the Sangha. This act is performed by the Bhikkhuni Sangha, not by the Bhikkhu Sangha. Therefore, in the absence of Bhikkhuni Sangha, a female candidate for ordination has no way to become a Sikamana. So there is a problem. In case of lack of Bhikkhuni Sangha, it is impossible to become a Sikamana. Without becoming a Sikamana, female candidate will not be able to fulfill the prescribed training leading to Upasampada. After completing her training in the 6 rules, a Sikamana must obtain an agreement from the Sangha on authorization to take Upasampada, and this agreement is given by a Bhikkhuni Sangha. Therefore, these 2 steps along the way to Upasampada, namely the agreement to train in the 6 rules during Sikamana training and the agreement confirming that the candidate has completed the 2 years training in the 6 rules, both agreements have to be conferred by a Bhikkhuni Sangha. Then the female candidate can receive full ordination. What happened if Bhikkhuni Sangha does not exist? In the absence of Theravada Bhikkhuni Sangha, a Vinaya expert say a candidate for Bhikkhuni ordination cannot pass through these 2 steps. Therefore, female candidate will not be qualified for full ordination. The last book of the Pali Vinaya Pitaka, known as the Parivara, is a technical manual dealing with the fine points of Vinaya observance. Among the stipulations of the Parivana, an Upasampada can fail on account of the candidate, on account of the motion, on account of the announcement, on account of a boundary, and on account of the assembly. Conservative Vinaya experts sometimes argue that a woman who has not undergone training as a Sikamana is not qualified candidate, and thus Upasampada given to her will be invalid. Upasampada is the full ordination stage. In the case of a Bhikkhu ordination, not Bhikkhuni, Bhikkhu ordination, the ordination of a monk, Upasampada, is administered by an act known as ordination with a motion as the fourth. First, the spokesman for the Sangha makes a motion to the Sangha to give ordination to the candidate with a certain senior monk as preceptor. Then he makes 3 announcements that the Sangha ordained the candidate with the senior monk as preceptor. Any monk present who disapproves is invited to voice up objection. Finally, if no monk has objected, he concludes that the Sangha has given ordination to the candidate with the senior monk as preceptor. When the Bhikkhuni Sangha was first established, the same method must have been used to ordain women as Bhikkhuni. However, after Bhikkhuni Sangha gained maturity, this method was replaced by another, which involved the participation of both the Bhikkhuni Sangha and the Bhikkhu Sangha. Both, in other words, Bhikkhu and Bhikkhuni Sangha ordain the candidate by separate processes following in close succession, each with a motion and 3 announcements. This method is therefore called ordination through 8 proclamation. The 6th Garodhamma means monastic rules, states that after training as a Sikhamana for 2 years in the 6 rules, the woman should seek upasampada from a dual Sangha from both the Bhikkhuni Sangha and the Bhikkhu Sangha. The Chulavagga section of the Vinaya describes that the candidate first takes ordination from the Bhikkhuni Sangha and then comes before the Bhikkhu Sangha to undergo the second ordination involving another motion and 3 announcements and confirmation. Just before I mentioned about Garudhamma, it's a monastic rule. So I will briefly introduce what are the Garudhamma. There are 8 Garudhamma. These are the precepts that Bhikkhuni need to keep. First, a nun who has been ordained even for 100 years must greet respectively, rise up from her seat, salute with joined palms, do proper homage to a monk ordained but that day. A nun must not spend the 3 months rainy retreat, rainy season, in a residence where there are no monks. Every half month, a nun should desire 2 things from the order of monks: the asking as to the date of the observance day and the coming for the exhortation. After the rains, a nun must invite before both orders in respect of 3 matters, namely what was seen, what was heard, and what was suspected. A nun offending against an important rule must undergo manata discipline for a half a month before both orders. This means Thanissaro Bhikkhu translated this in a way that a bhikkhuni who has broken any of the vows of respect must undergo penance for half a month under both Sangha. The 6th monastic rule is when, as a probationer, she has trained in the 6 rules for 2 years, she should seek higher ordination from both orders. Higher ordination means the stage of upasampada. A monk must not be abused or reviled in any way by a nun. From today, admonition of monks by nuns is forbidden. These are the 8 precepts that bhikkhunis must keep. We go back to the situation in which what happens if Bhikkhuni Sangha does not exist. The main legal objection that conservative Vinaya legalists raise against a revival of bhikkhuni ordination is that it must be given by an existing bhikkhuni sangha, and to be a purely Theravada ordination, it must come from the existing Theravada bhikkhuni sangha. In the absence of an existing Theravada bhikkhuni sangha, a legitimate Theravada bhikkhuni ordination cannot be granted. The ordination cannot be self-generated, but must be continuation of an existing tradition. Monks to attempt to reconstitute a broken bhikkhuni sangha is to claim a privilege unique to a perfectly enlightened Buddha, and no one but the next Buddha can claim that. So it is a dilemma to ordain bhikkhuni unless the Buddha reappears. In the Chulavada, it says, Bhikkhu, I allow bhikkhu to give upasampada to bhikkhuni, rightly pointing out the Buddha never revoked that allowance. However, it would be incorrect to say that the Buddha gave permission in perpetuity to the bhikkhu to ordain bhikkhuni on their own. As long as there were no bhikkhuni in existence, that is, at the very inception of the bhikkhuni sangha, it was only natural that the Buddha's allowance to the bhikkhu to ordain bhikkhuni would be applied in this way, because there was simply no other way it could be applied. Thereafter, the allowance continued, but it did not mean that bhikkhu on their own could ordain bhikkhuni. The Buddha did not revoke this allowance because the allowance was necessary after the dual sangha ordination procedures was initiated. If the Buddha had revoked the permission he had earlier given to bhikkhu to ordain bhikkhuni, then the bhikkhu sangha would not have been entitled to give ordination after the bhikkhuni sangha gave its ordination. When the new procedures were introduced, with the bhikkhuni sangha conferring ordination first, the allowance to the bhikkhu to ordain bhikkhuni was integrated into the new two-stage ordination. So the permission remained intact, except that now the bhikkhu did not act alone. The upasampada they were entitled to confer followed upasampada conferred by the bhikkhuni. This requirement for dual sangha ordination became integral to the Theravada tradition's conception of the bhikkhuni. In the Pali Vinaya Pitaka, we encounter a standard description of a bhikkhuni like this. So bhikkhuni is defined as one who is a mendicant. Bhikkhuni, one who arrives on arm's length, one who wears a robe made of cut-off patches, one who has the designation of a bhikkhuni, one who claims to be a bhikkhuni, or kam bhikkhuni, bhikkhuni, a bhikkhuni ordained by going to the three refuges, an excellent bhikkhuni, a bhikkhuni by essence, a trainee bhikkhuni, a bhikkhuni beyond training, a bhikkhuni fully ordained by a dual sangha in harmony, through an act that is unshakable and able to stand, consisting of a motion and three announcements. Among these, what is intended in this sense as a bhikkhuni is one fully ordained by a dual sangha in harmony, through an act that is unshakable and able to stand, consisting of a motion and three announcements. In Theravada countries, the dual Sangha ordination was regarded as mandatory. We found in the Vinaya Pitaka occasional mention of the Ekato Upasampanna, in other words, one ordained on one side. And we might suppose this means that some Bhikkhuni continue to be ordained solely by the Bhikkhu Sangha. However, this would be a misinterpretation of the expression. The expression Ekato Upasampanna refers to a woman who has received ordination solely from the Bhikkhuni Sangha, but not yet from the Bhikkhu Sangha. It denotes a woman in the intermediate stage between ordination by the two wings of the dual Sangha. The Pali Vinaya Pitaka is scrupulously consistent in restricting the use of the word Bhikkhuni to those who have fulfilled the dual Sangha ordination. In the Sutta Vibhanga section of the Vinaya, whenever the text has occasion to gloss the word Bhikkhuni, it states, a Bhikkhuni is one who has been ordained in the dual Sangha. If a single Sangha performs the ordination, the assembly is defective because valid ordination requires the participation of the two assemblies, such as Bhikkhu and Bhikkhuni Sangha. The motion and three announcements are also defective because only one motion and three announcements have been recited, whereas valid ordination requires two procedures, each with its own motion and three announcements. Since a Theravada Bhikkhuni Sangha no longer exists, the legalist arrives at the inevitable conclusion that there is simply no possibility of reviving the Theravada Bhikkhuni Sangha. Bhikkhuni ordination will remain out of reach throughout the duration of the present Buddha's dispensation. Conservative Theravada Vinaya authorities raise against restoring the Bhikkhuni ordination to the Theravada tradition. The factors that I will consider can be distributed into two groups. One might be called ancient mandate. Second, compelling contemporary circumstances. Let's look at the first factor. The primary ancient mandate is the Buddha's own decision to create a Bhikkhuni Sangha as a counterpart to the male Bhikkhu Sangha. When the 500 women headed by Mahapajapati Gotami came to the Buddha with their heads shaved, wearing ochre robes, they did not ask the Buddha to establish an order of nuns. These 500 women just simply asked the Buddha to permit women to go further from the household life into homelessness in the Dhamma and Vinaya proclaimed by the Tathagata. So these 500 women simply ask Pabaja stage. And I mentioned that the 500 women headed by Mahapaja Gotami. So here's image of Mahapaja Gotami, and she is the first nun, first Bhikkhuni, and actually before ordained, Mahapajapati was the aunt of the Shakyamuni Buddha. Here's quiz. Does the Bhikkhuni Sangha exist in Theravada Buddhism in this era? What is called the last stage of monastic ordination of a Bhikkhuni? I introduced 3 stages. The deadline of submitting quiz answers is until 21st of February, Wednesday midnight. Today, you learned overall Bhikkhuni ordination in Theravada tradition, and next week you will learn how the Buddha responded to the establishment of Bhikkhuni Sangha at the beginning and some resolutions to revive Bhikkhuni ordination without the Buddha's presence.